December 7th, the Ghanaian people conveyed a powerful message, yet often overlooked by us politicians. This message was powerfully emphasized by a giant of American political history, President Ronald Reagan, when he declared at his inauguration some 40 years ago that governments have no power except that granted by the people. While Ghanaians take great pride in our thriving democracy, they are deeply dissatisfied with the quality of governance over the years and have openly voiced that dissatisfaction through the decisive actions that they undertake at the elections. Our people also understand that democracy is not just a token adorned with periodic elections followed by pomp and pageantry with the establishment of a new government. They expect that if democracy is celebrated as a superior means of governance, then its outcomes must be more tangible and benefit them in their individual lives. Any honest introspection and reflection on the pulse of our nation would reveal that many within our population do not feel that they have benefited from or partaking in this democratic dividend. Where people buffeted by severe economic crisis and hardships, and in the last few years, we have lurched from crisis to crisis. But there is hope on the horizon. Actions have always spoken louder than words. With that in mind, I have entered into a covenant with you, the good people of Ghana, in which I have enumerated 26 actions that I'll take within my first 120 days. There is reason for hope, and there is every reason for hope. But we must also have faith, because faith empowers us to trust the things that will happen. With faith, you believe what you know, and that is why we need faith to be able to achieve our reset. We need a reset with the faith we have in our country and our leadership. We need a reset with the faith we have in our institutions. We need a reset with our faith in our dear nation, Ghana. And by that, I mean in all of us, because all of us are Ghana. You are Ghana, and I am Ghana. All of you seated here today, Ghanaian citizens, you are Ghana. The people who you are with or near you as you watch this on television, in your homes, or listen on radio, or follow on social media are what we call Ghana. I ask that we enter into the covenant with the Ghana we all love and the good people of our country who make up this dear nation. And I ask that you envision a Ghana that you want to live in, a Ghana that you want to leave behind to your children and your grandchildren. What can you do to help build that better Ghana that we all strive for? What behaviors, what attitudes and mindsets can we reset? We need a reset, and we have faith in Ghana's ability to overcome, excel, and be so successful with this reset that it will be difficult to imagine a time when that was not the case. As we stand at this momentous crossroads in our nation's history, I am honored and humbled to accept the mantle of the President of the Republic of Ghana. Today we celebrate a new administration and herald an unprecedented era of opportunity and transformation. I'll be decisive and swift in my actions. We'll focus our initial efforts on 4 critical areas. The first is economic restoration and stabilization of the macroeconomic environment. The second is the improvement of the business and investment environment to ensure that Ghana is once again open for business. The third its governance and constitutional reforms, and the final but not the least, its accountability and the fight against corruption.
So that was the President, John Dramani Mahama, delivering his speech at that inaugural ceremony at the Black Star Square on Tuesday. We have in studio Joyce Bauer Mogtari. She's aide to the President, and she says we should just call her by that. I mean, we shouldn't add any more, but yeah. For the next few weeks, she's aide, but maybe after the next few weeks, she'll be good. Okay. We're also joined via Zoom by Dr. Arthur Kennedy. He is a medical, practitioner and a known face in Ghana's politics. You remember him for the book he wrote after the 2008 elections. That popular book, Chasing the Elephant into the Bush. Well, I don't know what book he will write again after this. If that was Chasing the Elephant into the Bush, then of course this one would come with a gargantuan title. He's a physician and a political activist as well. Well, we're also expecting to be joined in the studio by Professor Bafo Agyeman. He is a former UN governance advisor. And look, it's a complete set for us to discuss what is ahead of us in the next 4 years, and what a way to do it by having an aide to the President himself and the aide herself here in the studio. Joyce Bauer Mogtari, good morning to you.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, everybody. Good morning to the good people of Ghana. Good morning, and this is the day after. Dr. Arthur Kennedy is a fantastic human being. Let me just say a very good morning to him and Happy New Year. And you know, in all humility and due deference, let me just express our gratitude to the good Lord and to the good people of Ghana. I believe a colleague of mine said something to me a few days ago, and he's a much older colleague, and that in the last 25 years, he has never seen such solidarity from the generality of the Ghanaian populace, okay? Not for any leader in a very long time. And I think it is actually the burden of it that actually keeps me very grounded. And so I'll very quickly say that may the good Lord grant His Excellency John Dramani Mahama the humility and the wisdom to appreciate the enormity of this responsibility.
Amen.
May we not become the government that when Dr. Arthur Kennedy starts to give us advice, we will refuse to heed or pay heed to the advice or the cautions of the generality of the good people of Ghana. Look, there's one lesson I've taken from what has just transpired. And when I saw our brother, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, pay such obedience to His Excellency the President yesterday, I asked myself, why do we not standardize respect in our political communication, okay? Why do we not also customize the approach to political campaigning? Why do we not also eschew the arrogance of power that will make you so blind and so thick-skinned that you no longer even feel the little things that pushed you to want to seek to serve in this high office? I know my boss very well. I know his modesty. I know, look, a few weeks ago, something very interesting happened. Now his children are adults. Those kids have gone through a lot because of their father's commitment to public service. But the beauty of it was sitting with them to advise them on their composure, you know, on their life going forward, on how this is going to be another chapter that will also impose very different responsibilities. Don't forget that kids feel these things the most, no matter what ages they are. You know, it tells you how grounded this family is and how grounded he wants to continue to be. The best part is that they are also the age of many young people. And so every young person will be looking up to them. I mean, look at my younger brother, Sharaf. Look at his contributions even in this campaign. And I always say that, you know, Sharaf mirrors his dad in so many ways. very down-to-earth kid, very grounded, very respectful, very well brought up. It's also testament to the strength of John Mahama and his wife and how they've raised their children, because they've raised them on these very strong Christian principles and using themselves as a model. I think that we will not see certain things that all of us probably will be uncomfortable with and dissatisfied with. I think what is important is that we'll be focusing on the priorities.
Okay.
That is to look at serving the good people of Ghana and serving the interest of Ghana. Never underestimate the numbers that turned out yesterday from across Africa and the world. You know, I met the Minister of Trade from the United Kingdom, and he had been here before. It was the way he expressed such hopefulness. You know, I watched Virginia Palmer, the ambassador of the US to Ghana, and the fact that President Biden made this effort to send a whole delegation to support Ambassador Virginia Palmer. It speaks volumes. You can see that there's a renewed hope. And I think I said something yesterday that we can at least hope again. And I loved how Mr. Mahama paid glowing tribute to the outgoing president and his vice president.
Right.
I think that also for me stood out in that whole conversation. Respect for your predecessor, respect for former presidents and former first and second ladies. You know, I think that a level of decorum was established yesterday. And I hope that we'll take it from that perspective.
So as he said yesterday in his speech, he says, is there a reason to hope? Yes, there's every reason to hope. You must also have faith, because faith empowers us to trust that things will happen. Well, let's see how it goes.
Yeah, but let's get initial comments, I think, from Dr. Arthur Kennedy.
Okay.
Yeah, Doc, it's, well, the dawn of a new day. And that speech that ushered us into this dawn of a new day yesterday, I'm curious to hear what your reflections are on it. I mean, we'll get surgical and incisive with those 4 thematic areas that the president intends to reset the country. But what was your general impression about the inaugural speech yesterday?
Good morning to your viewers. I must apologize. I'm a little under the weather. I have a cold.
Sorry.
But the comments by Joyce are very much on point. It was a very well delivered speech. The themes were right. It was right to the point. He hit important points. And I must say that I share the optimism of a lot of Ghanaians. I was in Ghana a few months ago, and at very short notice, I met now the president. He was then a candidate, and we had a conversation about the state of the nation and our future. That was very reassuring to me. He evinced a very good understanding of the state of crisis that the country is in, and therefore I am not that surprised at all about the inaugural address. I thought it was delivered well, and as we said, we can go into the thematic areas, but I took away a leader who gets things done. He said, I will act firmly and timelessly. I think that those are very reassuring, and every Ghanaian must wish His Excellency well. The responsibilities on his shoulders are broad, and he started very well, particularly with remarks about Anado and the thematic areas.
Thank you so much, Doc.
So let's come back to Joyce again. Joyce, today is the first day in office of the president. How is it going to be like?
Well, I'm sure that it's going to start like any other day in the life of a new president. Mr. Mahama literally has had to hit the ground running and knocking on many doors, as I'm sure you all know. And he hasn't stopped working ever since. Beyond working on the speech, there's also the challenges to do with the economy. There's issues to do with governance. You've heard about oral, which is actually an attempt also to reposition our anti-corruption attempts and fights that have so far proven almost elusive, really. The conundrum is that what else do we do? I think that let's see how this initial preparatory work actually feeds into every attempt that other leaders have made to stem corruption. Look, this morning we're going to have meetings from 11 a.m. and certainly the well-wishers have continued to come in their numbers. There's many envoys who've come also to participate in this amazing inauguration, this historic event, who will also be calling on him this morning. So yes, we'll still go through all the courtesies, as I call them, but immediately at 11 a.m., we have meetings in the office. And they start, of course, with some banks, with the African Development Bank, with the Afri-Exim. Look, there's also things going on. And as I'm sure we all know, the economy is actually one of our biggest Achilles heels, you know, how to get a consistent CD really, how to fully work to industrialize. I believe the very first set of appointments, I'm sure you know, had the executive secretary, had the chief of staff, and this morning, the office of chief of staff will also be engaging largely on the conversation that you were having just before I walked in. There's a huge outstanding payment, I think, in the regions of almost $90 million, really, to go to West African Gas Pipeline Company Limited. So these are all very, very urgent things that demand immediate attention. And so these are not things you can hold off even for the next few hours. So yes, today we will have very, very normal meetings. We'll have very serious engagements, all with a view to unraveling what is and what is not. The transition work is almost coming to an end. I've seen many of the notes, and the story is the same everywhere. You see millions of dollars that have come in. You come to the next page and work remains undone. And you come to the challenges and they say inadequate funding, literally everywhere, across the board. It is why he spoke also to the 4 areas of great concern. The first one about economic restoration. He didn't say improvements to the economy, etc. No, economic restoration for good reason. The next thing is to do with improving the business environment and climate. And when you watch the approach of all the high commissioners and the ambassadors, each conversation tells you the challenges to do with the business climate, the caustic business environment, the kickbacks, the corruption, the lack of accountability, how people just cancel and abrogate contracts with no explanations given, nothing whatsoever. We all remember the spat about PDS, a very public spat that was largely, you know, as a result of clanism and inability even to share the proceeds of what was to come. Ghana lost $12 million in that process. There are certain parts of this history that I pray we never have to experience again. And I hope that with the new dawn, with the new leadership, we can actually shut the door on these ones. No government will be perfect, but I believe that when people start to feel the impact of what government's policies can do for them, and I always say that, look, beyond data, beyond research, beyond good policies, is also about implementation and how that implementation impacts the lives of the people. Never lose sight of that. Look, if leadership will carry with them the aspirations of the generality of the people, everything will work. You know, you can have a great judiciary, but if the people don't feel the impact of justice, then what is the point? You can have a very fair government in place. If that fairness does not translate into the lives of people, forget it. Even if the economy is good and the few people who benefit from it are the only ones who think it is good because it does not dovetail the lives of other people, then forget it. There are some key things. Look, when people are hungry and you go and put an empty facility 10 meters away and call it part of Agenda 111, it's a waste of resources. Okay. Because if it doesn't impact their lives, it will do nothing to improve their lives. You know, there is a lot of optimism, even across our neighborhoods, in Africa, in ECOWAS, the AU. You can tell that something hasn't been right for a while. Now we are in government. You will now see the full length of the snake. Because certainly everything now will be laid bare to the good people of Ghana.
I think talking about, sorry to interject, I just want to move the conversation forward. Talking about hitting the ground running, we're speaking to Nana Mwesi, the Executive Director of IES. And of course, I'm sure the issue about the energy sector has come to your attention. In terms of economic restoration, stabilization of macroeconomic environment, energy is at the core of all these things. He says we are looking at approximately $8 to $9 million to fix the problems we need to fix immediately to keep the lights on. How do you react to this? And we're speaking to the past deputy minister, and he says he doesn't know how much fuel the outgoing administration left for us. as we speak. What do you know about the status of our energy sector, and how dire is the situation?
You know, I know we are in a very precarious situation. And before I walked in here, actually, I was speaking to the Honorable John Jinapor, who's been at the forefront of the Energy Committee of Parliament and has been engaged in some of the work of the Transition Committee, for example. And he knows there's a very dire situation. Don't forget that we are actually producing less gas than we need to feed the thermal plants. So because of that, we are having to import a lot of light crude oil for purposes of feeding these thermal plants. It is also about money and the fact that we owe these huge debts also to the independent power producers. And I believe I heard one of your resource persons who told you about the fact that this actually had absolutely nothing to do really with anything. It is just a challenge to do with lack of payment. Yes. Money is the real issue. Yeah. The question is that if we have money, $58 million, to put in a cathedral that is non-existent, where are our priorities? They inherited the energy sector levy. How did they utilize those monies? Those monies were to be invested in power distribution improvement. You remember the Millennium Compact, for example. And sadly, I sat in meetings with the boss at the Office of the Undersecretary of Trade in the US, and they lamented how inactivity from government, how government's refusal to cooperate, the fact that in the end they had to return for the first time over $160 million to the chest of the US because the money could not be utilized because government failed to deliver on accountability, the right due diligence, and these are matters of public record. So the fact that we have a new government in place is within itself reassuring. There is enormous optimism. I know Dumsor Mahama has actually over the last few days been engaging some of these companies that supply light crude, all with a view to come to a certain arrangement and understanding about how to repay some of these outstanding debts. If we can pay and stem the tide, why not? I believe that there's enormous goodwill, and so we must do what, you know, I think back to the State of the Nation address, where President Akufo-Addo was telling us very brazenly about leaving Dumsor with Mr. Mahama. Very disingenuous, yet knowing very well that the issues to do with the current power situation is about payments that have just not come, that nobody appears to care about, that only the issues to do with procurement are getting attention. So still it's about personal aggrandizement and personal pockets and feeding a few members of this very small family and friends, you know, administration. And so sometimes you ask whether or not it is the case that His Excellency, the former president, has not been adequately briefed. And know that in the course of the campaign, they said very little about energy or power, for example. But remember the propaganda about excess of power. But I love the fact that the resource person told you that this has absolutely nothing to do with excess of power, that there's even nothing called excess of power. My sister, if we produce adequate power and distribution is sustained and perfect, industries will grow. Right. It will reduce costs, it will improve efficiency. Right. This is what power does. In the jurisdictions where they don't have challenges to do with power and distribution, they have no issues. You've heard about the indebtedness of the Electricity Corporation of Ghana. I have heard proposals even from some people who have met with His Excellency President John Mahama that we need to break that company down into two. Okay. Let's look at the operations and then look at also the distribution. Right. Because maybe the bulkiness of that particular corporation is also a challenge. But look at the letter from Gridco.
Sorry to interject. If what Mr. Jinapor is saying is anything to go by, we are staring, I mean, we are standing on the edge of a precipice.
Don't worry.
How do you intend to actually steer the tide from here?
Every effort is being made to stem that tide. I know that. Every effort is being made. So worry not. Don't allow the enemy to deceive and mislead.
So we won't have Dumsor.
So we will not, yeah.
I am very convinced that we will not return to Dumsor. Don't forget that there's now a sustainable option in place, which is these thermal plants. It is the independent power, because you see, for many years we're entirely dependent on Akosombo, on hydro power, and on the fact that Bui didn't even come on stream. And climate change also makes it impossible for you to continue to depend on traditional ways of giving power to your people. I know that every effort is being made. Don't worry about it.
How much is the debt? How much is the debt in the sector now?
Oh my goodness, it's huge. I've just seen WAPCO alone talking about $89 million.
$89 million,
yes, and
entire debt.
That is just WAPCO.
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 Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And you know, they were even stopped from maintenance, routine maintenance, because there's no money to pay them for the maintenance. Then we have all the others at Sogli, and the Senate, and the many others. I have a tall list. I mean, I can even read it out to you.
Yeah, yes. I really want to know
so
how much debt is in the sector as of now.
The last one I checked, I think, is huge. I mean, in the totality of it, is a huge sum of money.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we are told that you said there's a meeting with the chief of staff over this.
Yes.
Does it include all the other power sector players?
You know, we have, over the course of the last few months, been engaging these independent power producers over the period. And John Jinapor just told me this morning about Asogli and what they don't have, about AXA, and yes, they are the ones who have not that much to offer. Then there's one called KTTP, which also has a few days to supply fuel, and WAPCO is also outstanding. So yes, there's quite a number of them. And I'm happy that today, considering the exigency and the emergency of the situation, certainly Mr. Deborah's office will be handling this, and I believe that they've been given the task of working to resolve this matter. You know, look, government has enormous resources. The challenge over the few years is that just a few unscrupulous persons very close to the corridors of power have actually sat on these resources. I know that if we are able to rearrange ourselves and prioritize the things that matter, we will keep the lights on. And this time around, I know that Mr. Mahama has his priorities very well in place, yes.
Because the power sector is really quite crucial to all the 4 areas that he mentioned.
To everything. Look, even with the economic stabilization, for example, beyond the reckless borrowing, and for that I believe that Parliament will come in very handy, because he has also promised that there's going to be a fiscal act to put a fetter on government's ability to borrow. So in future, before you borrow a certain threshold, you will have to then go to Parliament to seek permission. And the reasons why you are borrowing must be clearly stipulated. We still have the DDEP, we have all the outstanding debts to various international rating agencies. There is a lot in that sector that needs to be unraveled. And I believe that that will be at the basis of everything will stem with a consistent and dependable economy. Once we can work on the restoration, I know that everything else will fall in place. Look, there's debt everywhere, even with the flagship senior high school. There's huge debts outstanding. For the first time, we heard about WAEC. You know, there's just so much going on. I mean, if we sit here, we can sit here the whole day.
Yeah.
There's just so much going on.
We'll go into the other sectors and then bring in Dr. Arthur Kennedy. But there's an issue that everybody is talking about. And once you are close to the man, we want to have to understand how he sees it and how you see it as well. It's about allowing the president of Burkina?
Oh, Ibrahim Traore.
Ibrahim Traore, to go to him with a weapon strapped to him. A lot of people say, well, we shouldn't have allowed it, but you are close. You understand him better. Does it come to him as so that was a breach of, say, security protocols?
You know, look, we haven't even had a conversation about that, but did you see the reaction of the young people?
Yeah, they loved him.
And these were Ghanaian citizens.
Yeah.
Great. And before they actually even arrived at the premises, remember that there were various security checks. But this is a whole head of state, you understand. And you know, this is also a country with a very delicate history currently. And so there's all sorts of things at play. If there's anybody who can get him to actually even rescind his decision to continue being a military leader. And Ghana has had its own history. And Arthur Kennedy is here, and he was a friend of my half-brother many years ago. I'm sure you'll have a very nice story to tell about that era. Jerry Rawlings himself came in almost pretty much. And I hear this is a man who references late President Rawlings all the time and literally idolizes him and has photos of him all over. If we want a way in which we can encourage him, for example, to go back to democratic rule, I'm sure that this may be a great way, that you can still go to the polls and lead your country with whatever flair and pomp and pageantry you want to do. But yes, I also found it a bit awkward when I saw that he had the gun on his hip and all of that. But, you know, for all of us who are slightly older, we just asked ourselves, oh, really? There's a huge uproar. And you could tell there was a lot of excitement. In fact, he was the one who received the most applause after President Mahama himself. So I do know, but of course, you know that he will not take out a gun and, you know, do anything in a place like that. But I think that was also a bit much. But because he has become associated with this sort of outlook, it appears that he's actually garnered a huge following.
So you don't see it as a breach?
So for me personally, I think that it could have been done differently. But this was a handing over scene, so I think that there must have been good reasons why he was even allowed to come into the enclave with that on him. So I'm not the president, and I don't want to, and sometimes people can be very sensitive about these things, but I also found I was actually taken aback. We all get used to his photographs and everything, but I think that maybe on the occasion of yesterday, it even could have come in different.
Okay. All right, then. Yeah.
Right, let's get to Dr. Arthur Kennedy on Zoom with us. Doc, you can reflect on the conversation so far at this point, but I do want to find out from you, in terms of the very first mandate of President John Dramani Mahama, says he wants to restore the economy and stabilize macroeconomic environments. Do you get, or give me a sense of your thoughts in terms of how reassuring it was and the work that's really lies ahead of them? We do know that in 120 days, we have a social contract with the president and all that. But how confident are you in the first mandate of economic restoration, stabilization of macroeconomic environment, and today being a very first day in office? Give me a sense of your thoughts on that regard.
Yeah, I think listening to Joyce, it makes you concerned because there's been a transition committee, a joint transition committee that has been at work. But it seems that already the pronouncements from former President Nana Akufo-Addo during his final sona and some of the facts that are being put in front of us are a little bit at loggerheads. I think the transition committees must be able to throw things up a little bit. As to the Burkinabe president's attire, it gives some of us flashbacks. But I think Joyce is on to a point that he was very popular with the youth. It goes to the depth of the problems that we have in terms of stabilizing our democracy. People are losing faith in our democracy, and when you have leaders emerging who see the military rulings and Kagame as their role models, then you know that the work of democracy is far from finished and we need to work harder. Now, let me talk about the president's thing about economic stabilization. It is right on point. Economics is the foundation of everything. I heard him say that Ghana is back for business. That is a very good thing. I think that while his speech obviously couldn't go into every detail, I want to suggest that in terms of economic stabilization, the energy sector and accountability as far as funds and bad priorities are all important. But I want to suggest to the president that he should look very seriously at a robust, broad credit system. I think that part of why our economies don't work is the lack of credit. And in the US, for example, about the largest sector of our economy here is housing. And most of us buy houses on credit. So a robust credit system underpinned by data on where people live and credit scores and others will let our housing sector boom, which will be foundational to our economy and will lead to a lot of knock-on effects into the vehicle sector and to other areas. So the president is on to something, but I hope that we can solve foundational problems. I think that agribusiness that you referred to was very good. We must be able to produce at least what we eat. No nation can be great when it imports food that it has to eat, when it has arable land and unemployed youth. So those are very good directions, and I hope that consistent with his language, the president will act decisively and timelessly, as he said, to lay some of these foundations. And I'll have general remarks later on about how we can all help. It is very easy for all of us to say the president must do, the president must do. It's more of a question of what we must all do rather than just he alone as if we are just spectators. As Nana Akufo-Addo said, citizenship is not a spectator's sport. We must all be involved and we must be acting to help the president achieve his worthy goals.
Okay, let me come back to Joyce and on that economic restoration and stabilization of the macroeconomic environment. How exactly does he intend to achieve that?
Well, first and foremost, it will first start with what it is, all the efforts that you put in place. In fact, we remember that we'll immediately have a very new finance minister. We're all looking forward to the choice of the finance minister first and foremost. And that is where the job will actually be starting from. Secondly, we'll also be looking at a team probably at the presidency at the very highest level, advising also on the economy. Certainly remember that...
Where Gusitano is?
Yes, Gusitano, remember, is actually a very key component of job creation, which is another arm of economic restoration, because remember, unemployment is currently at 14.7%. I believe that this is conservative. It's definitely higher than that, because considering the numbers you meet who are literally unemployed, something must be done. Because look, the biggest security threat to Ghana today is unemployment. And that is why I come back to the theme of the speech, which is that it resonates with me largely because overwhelmingly I see enormous hope. There's a lot of optimism. People feel a certain reassurance. Now we have a president and vice president who both have children in the same bracket. It is actually the largest demographic of young people who literally are listless because jobs have become a huge challenge. Our inability to fully satisfy and provide sustainable jobs is also tied in very beautifully with the fact that this economy literally is bankrupt. So we live an economy that is actually designated on junk status. We live an economy mulcted in debt. We live an economy that actually has just in reserves about 8 billion, and yet we owe like twice that. Remember that our public debt today is actually about 740 billion cedis. That's humongous.
I'm sorry, let me take, did you say we have reserves about 8 billion?
Well, that's what President Akufo-Addo said.
Yeah, okay. Then I was going to ask that. So
and that is not necessarily
right.
Good. You know what I mean? So that is just a drop in the ocean of what we really need. To complete Agenda 111 alone, from what I gleaned from the transition documents, we need 1.4 billion cedis.
1.4 billion cedis to complete Agenda 111.
Of non-existent money. So the issues to do with the economy paint a very dire picture. And if we don't get that restoration right, look, sometimes the goodwill alone translates even into a certain stability. And when he said at the tail end that Ghana is open again for business, I think it sent a very clear message that he had listened to the block of diplomats who have many investors here who left for all sorts of reasons. At a time when Ghana really should be pumping oil like no man's business, we have actually come to a standstill. This is a government leaving office that inherited the 10 and Sankofa, inherited Ghana Gas and all of that. You would have expected that by now would at least have made some great inroads, that at least we should be able to comfortably say that we are not actually struggling to import light crude, because we would then, of course, be processing. These are all things that will actually also feed into job creation. Fortunately or unfortunately, things have not played out as we anticipated. I love one thing about His Excellency John Mahama's inaugural speech. No flowery language, no sloganeering. He didn't waste time on criticizing too much. What he tried to do was to carry the people with him. That I will be willing to lead you on these 4 thematic areas. But I will also need you, like Dr. Kennedy is saying, to support me in that endeavor. It is actually instructive also that today, the Office of the Chief of Staff, the Honorable Julius Deborah, and a few days ago, I was actually receiving these presidents with him. And I said, Chief, you know that this is going to involve a lot. He said, don't worry, it'll be different. And I'll do a very good job. I am very optimistic that the capabilities that we have today, the experience we've garnered over the last few years, the lessons we've learned from why President Akufo-Addo, who rode on the goodwill that we didn't even think we could repeat or even beat. Yeah. You understand? That literally swallowed that goodwill in the space of 8 years. I hope that we will retain it just because we must continue to give Ghanaians reasons to believe in Ghana. I think for us, that is the most important. And if anybody can do that, look, since the days of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, this is the first time that a political party has been able to garner 57%. It is historic. We must know that God still works in the affairs of men, and that this history must also be the one time that Ghanaians have every reason to hope again. And so on these 4 thematic areas, I know that very soon the work of the transition will come to an end. The formal report will be handed over. It would actually be, a conversation probably for the next month or 2. But what is important is that it paints a picture of a government that was very reckless in a lot of things that they did, especially when it comes to managing the economy. And so I know that the restoration also means the right people being put in place to lead that restoration.
Looks like Ghanaians were looking forward to, or some of the reasons why Ghanaians voted for President John Mahama because of the promise to abort e-levy and some other taxes that we were saying, nuisance taxes and all that. But it appears the wording has changed from scrapping to rationalizing these taxes. In terms of e-levy and COVID-19 levy, and we've had so many schools of thought about, and betting tax, about, even this morning, I think Dr. Kwame Asah-Asante was saying, don't scrap e-levy because the country doesn't have enough money, and e-levy is a good way to make some. What is the strategy here? Are you going to actually scrap these taxes as promised, or are you actually rationalizing until the economy has recovered before you can see about scrapping it all?
You see, when you and I talk about e-levy, and we look at it from our perspectives, then our response will be different. When you look at it from the perspective of financial inclusion, in a country where so many banks have largely collapsed, some intentionally, some deliberately, you now know that people do need a place where they can actually transact financial services without necessarily access to a bank. It is why these issues to do with mobile money transfers became such a key component. Talk to many of the international development partners. They all used to, distribute resources through this mechanism. In the end, what it did was that as soon as this levy was slapped on, note that there are key components of this levy. There were many schools of thought about the levy even, the quantum of it. In many jurisdictions, it was just a little above 0.5%, so that people are still comfortable to operate even within. But for us, at the 1.5%, that is huge. Ask your domestic staff today, when you want to pay them through the mobile, they go, oh, madam, can you add the charge? Can you add the fee? So this is also a reason why people are no longer transacting business through. Look, in the course of the campaign, there was certainly a lot of money transactions going on. And now, because you know that polling agents can hold political parties to ransom, many of these transactions were done through these mobile telephony financial transactions. So naturally, we had reason to see some very big inflows. Over the next few months, it will settle again. There is every purpose for which this e-levy ought to be scrapped. Not for us who are on this level and can pay the charges, but for the many who have no other options but to transact business using this platform. And that is very critical. The next thing is to do with COVID. So if we're taking all this COVID levy years after the pandemic, and we have still not been able to complete Agenda 111, then why do we want to continue to maintain it? My sister, there is a lot of resources in Ghana. And I remember a few months ago, we met the president of the House of Chiefs in the Western region. The Western region is home to the largest deposits of most of Ghana's natural resources. How have we leveraged on development in the Western region? Indeed, the Western region suffered on the multi-dimensionally poor ratings and even went 20% poorer. Most of the investments that came in to greet the reception of Ghana's oil find have all left. What is the reason? Too much bureaucracy, red tape. I work in the industry. I talk to a lot of people in the industry. There is enormous interference from family and friends, from people who have no business even to interfere. There's too much corruption. There's demands for kickbacks. There's also things going on. Look, just having a new sheriff in town alone has actually renewed confidence in a lot of businesses.
So is that a confirmation that you're scrapping the e-levy?
That must go.
Okay.
And you
Thanks
know,
for the clarification.
ask why we have this large number in Parliament. The protest was against not just the MPP leadership, but their members of Parliament as well. Yeah. It means Ghanaians were not impressed by the acrimony of the hand parliaments, and so decided that for whatever purposes, we will vote against not just their leadership, but of course their members of Parliament as well. God did not give us this level of victory for us to joke with it. Okay. And if anybody knows that, I'm sure that Mr. Mahama knows that all the odds were against him.
Okay. Talking about odds, does that also include betting tax?
Yeah,
I need clarification. So all of them?
All of the taxes.
Thank you. Okay,
wow.
So just, it's good that we clarified, because the commentary on social media...
Remember that there's going to be a huge tax overhaul, and I'm happy that Prof is here. He's a very experienced individual. So he knows. Look, the biggest challenge we have is that what does the Internal Revenue Service do? They harass you. They teach you tax avoidance because they are part of the architecture of tax avoidance. You in the media can help us to get the Ghana Revenue Authority to stand on its toes. Have you seen the numbers of people they employ there? Have you seen the number of vehicles they have there? Have you seen the levels of procurement going on? It's amazing. So who is going to be paying for you just to satisfy your pockets and your personal lifestyles? Okay. There are a lot, look, there is a lot of conversations that will go on, and I think that, you know me, if you give it to me...
you keep going on, eh?
But in trying to... in trying to restore the economy and the macroeconomic environment, which of the promises for the 120 days in office will we see now in trying to restore the economy?
Oh, I've told you that the goodwill alone is first. That the business climate is going to be different is second. That we are inviting investors to come
I'm looking at the 120 days. I think he listed things that he will do in the 120 days.
In the thematic areas he has explained, that we'll look at the economic restoration. I've told you to start with the new financial gurus in town. I don't know yet who they will be. There's a BOG with serious challenges, with large funding gaps. They've actually repositioned themselves. I'm not even sure whether they are still a supervisor, a monetary, or now deposit taking, because they themselves have accounted for some losses. Okay. There are a lot of things going on. There's the exchange rate issues, and we know what the conversations were around exchange rate. Nothing has changed. There must be a renewed commitment to change the face of the economy. Okay. And in the next 120 days, and you see, you watch how Mr. Mahama has used his own sense of agric to attract a certain interest. When you go to Nigeria, there's a new reformation taking place. Maybe we haven't noticed. Many young people are going into agric in beautiful logistical ways that if we were to introduce in Ghana and have government invest, and you see this time, invest in the individuals who have expressed commitment, not just for an agric minister to take 2.8 billion cedis, going around and purchasing plantain that he doesn't know what to do with. That's not what we're talking about, and certainly not about slogans. If we want to make agric attractive to young people, to feed ourselves first, like Dr. Kennedy is saying, and then add value to the surplus, let me tell you, there's one young man I met, very young man, who is into poultry. He says he controls 1/3 of the market share of poultry in Nigeria. Can you imagine what that looks like? That's huge. These are intentional policies by government. I am happy that Mr. Mahama is meeting the Africa Free Trade Continental representative in the next few days. This is another area we can explore. Look at trade inflows between Ghana and some of our closest neighbors. It's almost impossible. It's negligible. Look at Ghana and Gabon. Look at Ghana and Togo. Think about it. Look at the positioning even of our imports, for example. We just import and eat. Look at the import bill alone, millions of dollars. 300 million for rice alone. Why should we be doing that? All the places we visited in the last 2 weeks, we've eaten locally produced dishes. In fact, in Equatorial Guinea, we were served with antelope, and they told us they are there in the forest. That's what they eat. I think if we can emulate this, if Ghanaians will reduce our love for foreign goods, I believe that the journey starts with all of us. As I said, Prof is a bit more experienced in this.
Right.
I'm excited by two things.
Yeah.
Her touch on the Western region, you know, that's where I come from.
Yeah.
So if you want to, again, her touch on agriculture.
Yeah.
I'm into rice production.
Right.
And I've always said that we have what it takes to feed our people when it comes to rice. We produce a lot of rice, you know. If we can focus on eating Ghana rice, the jobs will create and the billionaires will create. I want you to look up for new age agri solutions. Mogtari.
You know, my friend actually is a big deal on agri. So
and see what we do. You know, the production we can, if support comes, we can change a lot of things and create jobs. That's
and
major.
trust me, the right kind of support is coming.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's bring in Professor Jinapor into the conversation. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
We're just looking at the inaugural speech, Mahama's 120 days, the social contracts that he's entered with. Of course, he said in the first 14 days he'll be appointing his members of cabinet and all that. And we're looking at how he has promised to restore the economy and stabilize macroeconomic environment. I know you've already shared some thoughts on the speech itself. Yesterday, I listened to you. But let me narrow it down. First, you can give us your initial remarks, but let me narrow it down to economic restoration and stabilization of the macroeconomic environment and the current power crisis situation that we are facing. How do you reconcile this promise to what the reality is on ground? Your reflections.
Well, first of all, good morning, and I have to say what a great pleasure to be sharing this forum with Joyce, one of the most dynamic women we have in the country.
One of the stars of this John Mahama campaign.
The country.
Okay.
We're talking about the government, the country. It's a real asset. And I'm sure she's already told us exactly what is going to happen in the coming around 20 days.
Yeah.
And certainly, anybody who has been observing this country for the past 8 years or so will certainly come to a conclusion that a change was a necessity for all of us. And the change has come. And in many ways, I think the change has brought some new hope. And I'm hoping and praying that this new hope and expectation will not turn to be another great disappointment. And the good news for me is that the new president is not a new kid on the block. He was there for 4 years plus, 8 years, right? Including Atamil's period. And he's been away for 8 years. I believe he has had enough time to reflect deeply. And he's coming back to just make a legacy. For me, that is what makes me hopeful. And if I listen to him and his associates and people like Joyce who are with him, I can be hopeful that, in fact, they are more than determined to turn the fortunes of this country around.
Right.
And that pleases me. Having said that, well, let me say I'm not an energy expert.
Right.
Neither am I an economist. But I think common sense will tell you what has been wrong and what needs to be done. And the president's statement on finding a way to stabilize the economy certainly needs all the support. You see, one of the things I want to stress now is that when the president says he will do something, whether you are in or out of government, once that policy is a good one, it needs the support of all of us. For me, if Akufo-Addo had been successful, it had been good for all of Ghana.
Right.
In the same way, I'm praying that Mahama will be successful, because if he's successful, all Ghana stands to benefit. So it's not a matter of whether you are NDC or you are NPP or you are nothing at all. I think we need to come together to move this country forward. So one of the things that the president said yesterday, that again pleases me, is his notion of inclusivity. It's important that at this point, he find a way to bring everybody together, including the outgone party people. They have to be part of the process, because it's come to a time where all of us should find a way to mobilize our forces to support the government. Certainly, the economy is not the best.
On the lighter side, Prof, I think some of them will disagree with you, because this morning we're just asking for data in terms of how much fuel reserve we have. And the response is more like, we're out of power, so deal with it. We are not answerable to you.
Look, for the next few weeks, allow that to happen.
Okay.
Just as for the next few weeks, allow the new government to put all the blame on the outgone government.
Okay.
That's acceptable. But yesterday, I had an opportunity to say, like, and I quoted Colin Powell, the former general of the U.S. military, in fact, chief of staff, In his book, My American Journey, he says, in their service, when you're given a command, you have all the first 6 months to put all the blame on your predecessor. But after 6 months, if you continue to blame your predecessor, then you are not up to stuff. You see? So I think that should be the spirit. Allow them for the next 6 months to do all what they want. But at the same time for them, the seriousness with which they will approach the new assignment for the country is what will matter to me.
Okay.
So certainly if he's going to look at stabilizing the economy, that's exactly what we want to see, because we know the currency is weak, the cedi is weak. We know we cannot even go out to borrow much. And that is why what Joyce was saying and what the president himself said in his speech, turning attention to agriculture in a new way. Every government that has come to this country talks about agriculture, at times saying it's the mainstay of the economy. Technically, that is true. But that statement has not been matching well with the actions that follow. So if now the new government said they are going to take agri seriously, and there's something that he didn't mention, but I think it's inherent in what he said. And maybe they also don't want to use words that have been used previously. And I'll come to this because towards the 2016 campaign, the new chief of staff, together with the new president, made some statements in the north, which are recorded. They were saying maybe you should go back to Operation Feed Yourself, which was a Champon program. This time he didn't use the name. But I think there's nothing shameful about coming out to say we got to begin to feed ourselves, because if you can take care of self-feeding, that alone can take about 30% of our economic problems away. And I'm glad to know you are in rice farming.
Yes.
At Champon's time, for 3 years, Ghana was more than self-sufficient, and we exported rice to Burkina Faso. It's recorded. I'm not just telling a story. And that should inspire us. We should know that we have done it before. So this time, if you want to feed ourselves, not only in the rice, but why should we be importing tomato from Burkina Faso? Yesterday, when the Burkina leader came, I was very happy. He's one person I admire, and I have to be honest. I adore him. Put the military stuff aside. His vision, his ideas, his actions are telling me that there's a new leadership in Africa that is emerging. That's what we want. People who should bring dignity to their people, but not to continue to go and kowtow and be begging white folks on what we need to do. So I'm hoping President Mahama is having that spirit. I'm really praying and hoping that's the new spirit with which he's going to tackle his 4 years in office.
We'll come back to you, but let's bring in Dr. Arthur Kennedy now. He's been on Zoom for quite some time now. Doc, you listened to Prof. and Joyce. What do you think the president should be doing now in his aim to reset Ghana, to make sure he rebuilt the economy that has suffered in the past 8 years?
Well, I think that Prof. Hit the nail on the head. All new leaders say the right things. The question is whether they do the right things. It's been very reassuring listening to Joyce this morning, hitting all the right notes, but as they say, deeds, not words. So I think Prof. Bafo-Adjumani said the first 6 months they can blame their predecessors. I think 6 months is a long time. So it might be shorter than...
No honeymoon period.
Having said that, I actually also think that it is a very sad reflection on our democracy that all these botched priorities occurred when we had a parliament. Remember, in 2017, Nana-Addo rode into office with a very large majority, which was shrunk in 2020. And even in the divided parliament, there could have been an accountability and truth speaking. Not too much of that happened. So even while we blame the friends and family for all the malfeasance, we should also say that maybe we could have gotten a little more from Parliament. And I know my friend Babin did the best he could with a divided Parliament that was challenging, but our institutions must work, both for accountability and communication and candor. I think that Ghanaians have a nature of not being candid with powerful people. That is why when people leave office, all of a sudden, all these bad stuff start coming out. Because it is amazing that this same government that is just out of power in such disgrace had a candidate who was on the cusp of becoming president based on the agenda of continuity. It means there's something missing in our body politic about candor and accountability, regardless of who is in office. But I think, like I said earlier, the president has very good priorities. Yes, indeed, Operation Feed Yourself is a good idea. It is a disgrace that a country with as much arable land as we have should import food, rice and tomatoes and all those fish. We need to produce enough of that to feed ourselves. And that is the first foundation of a good, strong, independent country. We cannot talk about Ghana beyond aid, and then when we give the speeches, the very next week, we are out there begging for loans and for handouts. That is inconsistent with Ghana beyond aid.
Doc, Brace, sorry. Doc, you did mention that you wanted to share how we can help, because the president yesterday said he alone cannot do the job. The task ahead is too big for to be left on his shoulders alone. So how can we help as citizens?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. How we can help as citizens is that I think that most presidents have good intentions. This president does. When I talk to him, that is the impression I got. He will name people he believes to be good people into a lot of positions. But when they get there, they must do the work to help him. The problem is that people get to these agencies, and then when they get there, they get localized and taken over by private interests that are inimical to the country. And then they start doing their own thing. When they put you as the head of an institution, build that institution and make it stronger. The truth of the matter is that in the last 8 years, virtually all our institutions have been weakened. Then in terms of helping, another way that I think we must be able to help the president is to mobilize the diaspora. When I talk about mobilizing the diaspora, it is interesting that in 2023, the Ghanaian diaspora sent home more money than the IMF has given Ghana. I think that the diaspora is an untapped potential. And when I talk about the diaspora, I'm not even talking about people like me. And I noticed Joyce talked about how Professor Nana Jinapor and the president, both young children, some of whom have been educated abroad. I and people like Professor Asare and Stephen Ofure-Appiah and Max Logan all have very well educated, bright children. So we are just debate. The people we need are not us. I will be dead in 20 years if I'm lucky, but my kids will be alive in 50 years, all on the cusp of becoming doctors. They are young accountants and others with global values, with global skills. Those are the people we must attract to come back to Ghana and believe in the Ghana dream.
Right.
And we can do that with helping them to vote, dual citizenship bill, economic reforms that will make it easy for them to come back to Ghana and invest. When we do that, we would unleash a potential torrent of talent that will help lift the country to where it needs to be. Okay. And finally, since I have Joyce here, let me bend her ear. One area we have that most, my sister, is tourism. Instead of building a cathedral in which we sunk money into the ground, I suggest that we should have revamped our tourist industry all along the coast, modernize our castles, build modern hotels, and inspire the American diaspora and blacks all over the world to come back to their roots to see what happened to the slaves, Salaga Market, what do they call Asin, where the slaves had their last bath, the castle and other things. These will be experiences that will send the African diaspora back to Ghana to rediscover their spiritual roots and pump billions into our economy. Okay. That is a huge untapped potential.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doc. Just about wrapping up, Prof, but you are a governance person, so I would want you to touch on the bit about governance and constitutional reforms that he seeks to undertake in just a minute for us, sir.
Look, I'm so happy. That was one of the key 4 areas he mentioned. And this morning, as I was coming, I just read briefly the former Chief Justice Sophia Akufo's comments, disagreeing with Akufo-Addo, who insisted that we have the best constitution. Not true. For the past 15, 20 years that I've been involved in this business, from CDD time, we have been saying that, look, despite the fact that the Constitution has stabilized our politics to enable us to have this ritual of elections and takeovers, we are not moving forward because of certain constrictions within the Constitution. So I'm happy it's one of the areas. And I think over the time, it's easy. Go to Imani, go to CDD, go to IDEC, and other civil society forums. We have teased out what needs to be. My personal pet area that needs to be reformed. And I'm hitting on this because it will be fundamentally a new area that we have to set for ourselves for our development, is taking decentralization to its logical conclusion. The concentration, I rather say over-concentration of power in Accra is killing us as people. If you leave Accra and go anywhere else, there's no country. It's all dead places. Only because, what? Everything is here. Secondly, young people today can groom and become political leaders only when they join governments. But I think politics should start from the grassroots, which is at the town level, unit level, to the assembly level, where the assembly members can think and plan, and the national government simply subsidizes what they need to do by a fair way of redistributing the national assets that we have in terms of taxation and all. The District Assembly Common Fund is one good area, but it's not all. Okay? So I guess I'm saying that power should shift from Accra to the district, so that people can begin to feel like they don't have to wait for 4 years before they become politically active.
Right.
That their political activism should start from the district level.
Okay. All right.
You know, what's interesting is during campaign time, the person who articulated this decentralization idea very well was Nana Frimpong Akumakuma. Yeah, I listened to her about how decentralization was the way to go. But we do have to go. And Madam Joyce, in your final remark, please, I know that the president couldn't possibly touch on everything in his inaugural speech yesterday, but it was interesting that he left out Galamsey, which I think was a huge contributing factor to his win. In your final remarks, can you tell us why we missed that in the speech yesterday?
Well, you know, I believe that we are all adamant that we possibly can't put everything in. And I also think that beyond everything else that was not in the speech is also the level of thematic areas that he actually gave us. And so you cannot speak even to our economic restoration and not speak to investors coming back if you don't even deal with Galamsey. Know that in most of the mining communities, one of the biggest reasons why a lot of the big responsible mining companies are leaving is because of interference in these Galamsey areas specifically. It's a huge challenge. So there's a whole conversation around Galamsey that we have yet even to explore. Okay. And I think that is one of it. The second thing also is that it is also because a lot of conversations have taken place about a lot of these things. I know in the next few days that there will also be a group being put in place to start working on Galamsey. Look, it is also about livelihood and survival. That's the part that we all don't talk about. Who wants to go into those pits? For all the videos we've seen, do you want your brother or sister to even be engaged in this sort of thing? No. But where are all those unscrupulous persons who buy these things and take them away? So it is a whole conversation. But the best part is the Australian ambassador, because you know they are also a very huge mining country. They've offered a certain package to deal and support the government of Ghana. Look, my sister, everything starts with goodwill. I think there's a lot of goodwill. I love what I'm hearing from all sorts of people, even from very strong members of the NPP. They are willing to offer support. You know, there's a conversation we had recently that in the first course of Dumsor, for example, we didn't get any support. It was turned into a political tool. But all of us were sleeping in darkness, including those who were using Dumsor to whip. So let's just remember that there's a lot of hope, a lot of optimism. And you see, that is Mr. Mahama for you. I remember the text message I got from Dr. Kennedy a few months ago. At the time when, the campaign was at this very, very strong, season. But he had time to listen. He had time to pay heed to whatever advice he wanted to offer. And there's many of these people having conversations with him.
Okay.
And I love the
All right.
offer also from the civil society organizations. Look, beyond sitting on the fence, I've said it. Those of them who are engaged in agric, who are engaged in mining. And I'm happy that those in mining brought a very beautiful document. And they even wanted all political parties to sign on to the document. That they were willing even to lead this exercise.
Okay.
So the back starts with goodwill. It stops with goodwill. It also starts with leadership. It ends with leadership.
Okay.
I hope that we can deliver on the leadership that requires this sort of support.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It's been a great panel.
Yeah, it has been. It has been really. And I've enjoyed myself. When it comes to the tourist side, please, the roads to the tourist side are not good at all. That's where we have to start from.
And besides that, if I should add, there are some very important private initiatives.
Yes.
Look, there's a Safari Valley.
Yes.
Yeah.
That guy, young man, needs support to turn that valley into a major tourist attraction. It needs government support in any way. If there is something existing, we don't need to recreate.
Okay.
After all, whatever government puts its hand in doesn't work too well.
Okay.
So those who join us for this conversation, we had Joyce Ba Mogtari, aide to the president, Professor Akufo-Addo Mendia, former UN governance advisor, of course, Dr. Arthur Kennedy, physician and political activist who joined us via Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us to put in perspective the work ahead of this new administration in Ghana. Do stay with us. When we come back, we'll take a look at Ghana's road infrastructure and what is really needed to enhance that sector. We're back in a bit.